The string lights over the charity event were calibrated to look like stars, but they just cast harsh, flickering shadows across the faces of the hospital board members, cornering the woman in the red dress. I stood by the perimeter hedge, the earpiece of my radio a cold knot of plastic against my jaw, watching the trap close. The venue was an estate garden on the coast, packed with donors holding fluted glasses, the air thick with the smell of jasmine and expensive gin. Mason Holt, an old friend from my first security unit, was hosting the hospital foundation's charity party and had hired my firm to monitor the gates. But the real threat wasn't trying to get in. It was already inside, wearing a bespoke suit, crowding her against the stone balustrade. The woman was Dr. Darcy Martinez. I knew her face from the briefing dossier. Chief of Surgery, 38, a reputation for flawless precision in the OR. Right now, she was trying to maintain a polite smile, but her hand rose to cover her mouth in a gesture that read to the rest of the garden as a demure laugh. From my angle, 20 feet away, I could see her fingers trembling. The man cornering her, a board member whose name tag read Vance, leaned in, tapping a heavy linen envelope against the stone. "It's a simple committee penalty." "Darcy." Vance's voice drifted over the noise of the string quartet, carrying that specific, oily cadence of a threat dressed as a favor. The clinic's insurance claims were denied. The board can't subsidize undocumented charity cases when you yourself are, 2 months away from a visa renewal? Darcy didn't flinch, but her spine went rigid. The red silk of her dress shifted in the ocean breeze. She looked poised, untouchable, but her eyes darted toward the exit path, blocked by 2 of Vance's colleagues. "The strongest position is the one you never have to raise your voice to defend. My old training officer used to drill that into us." Vance was raising his voice, just a fraction. He was weak. I stepped off the grass and onto the stone path. I didn't hurry. Moving fast draws eyes. I just walked a straight, unyielding line through the crowd, my gray t-shirt a stark contrast to the sea of tuxedos. Vance's 2 colleagues saw me coming. I didn't ask them to move. I just kept walking, keeping my shoulders square, projecting the absolute certainty that they would step aside. They did. I stopped beside Darcy, up close. She smelled like clean linen and the faint, sharp tang of antiseptic soap. "Excuse me," I said. My voice was low, flat, completely devoid of deference. I looked at Vance, ignoring the envelope in his hand. "Dr. Martinez, your driver's waiting at the south gate. The perimeter's being locked down for the silent auction." Vance sneered, looking me up and down. "We're in the middle of a private conversation, pal." I didn't look back at him. I kept my eyes on the tree line. "The south gate closes in 2 minutes. If you want to avoid the press line, it's doctor. Now is the time." Darcy's eyes flicked to me. They were a dark, piercing brown, calculating the risk. She didn't know me. She knew the radio on my belt and the badge clipped to my jeans. She dropped her hand from her mouth. "Thank you," she said, her voice remarkably steady. She looked at Vance. "We'll discuss the committee's penalties at the hearing. Not here." She stepped past him. I fell in right behind her, a solid wall between her back and Vance's stare. As we cleared the edge of the patio, I heard the heavy linen envelope hit the stone floor. Vance had dropped it in his frustration. I scooped it up without breaking stride. We made it to the south gate. The coastal fog was rolling in, damp and cold. Darcy stopped under the glow of a street lamp, wrapping her arms around herself. "I don't have a driver," she said, not looking at me. "I know." I pulled my radio off my belt and keyed the mic. "Command, this is Myers. Post 4 is secure. Going off comm for a perimeter check." I clipped it back. "My truck is in the alley. I can get you to a cab stand 3 blocks out." She looked at me properly for the first time. Her shoulders dropped all at once, and she missed the bottom button of her cardigan twice before her fingers finally found it. The cardigan ended up buttoned wrong, a tiny flaw in an otherwise perfect exterior. I held out the envelope. "He dropped this." She stared at the thick paper like it was a live wire. "Keep it, burn it. It's a denial notice for 50 claims. They're trying to starve my clinic to force my resignation." I meant to hand it to her and walk back to my post. That was the job. Instead, I folded the envelope and slid it into my jacket pocket. Cab stand is this way. We walked in silence. The fog thickened, muting the sounds of the party. I didn't ask about the visa threat. I didn't ask why the chief of surgery was being squeezed by a hospital committee. I just watched the shadows, making sure no one had followed. When we reached the cab stand, I opened the door of the first idling taxi. She paused with one foot inside. "Why did you step in?" she asked. "You looked like you needed an exit." I shut the door before she could thank me again. I went back to the estate, finished the shift, and went home to my apartment over a closed auto body shop. It was 3 a.m. I lived on the night shift. It was quieter, fewer people demanding things. I sat at my kitchen table, poured a glass of water, and took the envelope out of my pocket. All 50 denial letters carried the same exception code, and their claim control numbers had been processed inside 90 seconds. It wasn't proof of fraud, but it was enough to justify a lawful audit. I should have shredded it. It wasn't my contract. A sharp knock at the door rattled the deadbolt. I stood, moving silently to the door. I checked the peephole. It was my younger brother, Leo. He looked pale, leaning heavily against the doorframe, gripping his left forearm. We hadn't spoken in 8 months. I unbolted the door. "What happened?" "Nail gun." Leo grunted, stumbling inside. Blood was soaking through a makeshift rag wrapped around his arm. I was doing a late shift at the framing site. It slipped. I can't go to the company ER. Kace, my foreman, said he'd fire anyone who reported another injury. And the whole crew thinks the contract will get pulled. I guided him to a kitchen chair. "I'm not a doctor, Leo." "You know people," he hissed, wincing as I unwrapped the rag. The puncture was deep, dangerously close to an artery. "You always know a guy." I looked at the envelope on the table. Then I looked at the clock, 3:15 a.m. I grabbed my keys. "Let's go." My truck was a 10-year-old rig that smelled like stale coffee and ozone. The driver's side windshield wiper was damaged. It skipped a 2-inch section of glass directly in my line of sight on every pass. I turned the wipers on as the coastal drizzle picked up. Squeak skip, squeak skip. I drove to the address printed on the letterhead of the denial notices. The Martinez Free Clinic. It was in a rough industrial sector, housed in an old brick warehouse. A single light burned in the back office. I got Leo out of the truck and pounded on the reinforced glass of the clinic door. A moment later, the deadbolt threw. Darcy stood there, still in the red dress, her hair falling out of its elaborate updo. She had a heavy flashlight gripped in her right hand, raised like a club. When she saw me, the flashlight lowered. She said, "I came straight here after the gala. The denial files have to be included in the board packet before 6. "He caught a nail," I said, nodding to Leo. "It needs a surgeon, not a resident. He's afraid his employer will retaliate if the injury is reported through the company." She didn't ask questions. The hesitation vanished, replaced by an instant, icy competence. "Bring him to exam room 2. He still gets a confidential charity chart. No one is treated without a record in my clinic." I watched her work. The transition was absolute. At the party, she had been a target. Here, under the harsh fluorescent lights, she was a machine. She numbed the arm, cleaned the track, and sutured the wound with a speed and precision that made the room go entirely quiet. I stood out of the way, holding the sterile tray when she pointed to it, saying nothing. "You're lucky," she told Leo, snipping the final thread. "Half an inch to the left and you'd need emergency vascular repair in an operating room." She bandaged him, entered the prescription into the clinic's confidential dispensing log, then handed him a labeled blister pack of antibiotics from a locked cabinet. Before sending him out to rest in my truck, she gave him the number for a workers' rights clinic that could document retaliation without notifying his foreman first. When the clinic was empty again, she went to the sink and scrubbed her hands. The water ran over her knuckles long after the soap was gone. When she finally shut it off, both palms stayed braced against the steel basin. "Thank you," I said. "We're even for the cab out of the party," she replied. drying her hands on a paper towel. She leaned against the counter, closing her eyes for a second. "Though I don't know your name." Kace Myers." I pulled the folded envelope out of my jacket and set it on the stainless steel counter. Her eyes opened, landing on the paper. Her jaw tightened. "I told you to burn that." "The 50 letters share one exception code and a 90-second window," I said. "That isn't proof, but the clinic-side portal logs can show whether an executive intervened." She stared at me, the use of her first name hanging in the quiet room. "Are you a cop?" "Corporate security. I trace leaks and build perimeters. Someone may be manufacturing insolvency so the committee can absorb this property." I tapped the envelope. "A formal penalty could also cost you the visa sponsorship tied to your standing as chief of surgery." She looked away, staring at the cracked tile of the floor. "I have 8 weeks before the renewal deadline. The board hearing is in 3. I can prove the fraud." I said, "No." Her head snapped up. "No, you won't. If you try to hack the hospital servers and fail, they'll file federal charges. It's my clinic, my problem." Her arms folded tighter, and the paper towel crushed between her fingers. Facing Vance had frightened her less than letting someone else carry even one piece of the weight. "I don't hack," I said calmly. "I do audits, physical access, chain of custody. I can review your end of the server logs without touching anything I'm not authorized to see." She kept her arms crossed. "Why?" "Because you fixed my brother's arm. I let the silence sit between us. Do you want me to document this, or do you want me to walk away?" Darcy held my gaze. The paper towel loosened in her hand. "Document it, but we do it lawfully, and we do it together." "Tomorrow night at 9? She nodded once. "I'll have the clinic-side logs printed." I walked out, the heavy metal door clicking shut behind me. For the next 2 weeks, the clinic became my night shift. I'd arrive at 2100 hours. The clinic would be winding down, the waiting room emptying of day laborers worried about their employers and frightened families. I'd lock the front doors, drop the security grills, and set up my laptop on the small metal desk in her back office. We didn't talk much at first. She would sit at her own desk, charting files, the scratch of her pen the only sound in the room. I liked the quiet. I was used to people who filled silence with nervous chatter. Darcy just worked. It was a Tuesday night when the exhaustion finally caught her. Darcy had authorized read-only access to the clinic-side portal logs. I was cross-referencing the exception events against their source addresses when the glow of the screen illuminated the small office. I glanced over. Darcy was staring at a patient file, but her eyes weren't tracking. The pen in her hand was still. She blinked, a slow, heavy movement, and her head dipped slightly. I closed my laptop quietly. I walked over to the break room corner, poured a cup of the terrible generic coffee she kept stocked, and set it on her desk, exactly 2 inches from her hand. She startled slightly, looking at the mug. "Take a break, Darcy," I said. She rubbed her temples. "I can't. If I don't finish these charts by morning, the committee docks our supply budget." "The charts require your signature," I said, pulling up a second metal chair to her desk. "They don't require you to organize the diagnostic codes. Hand me the master list." She looked at me, a protest forming on her lips, but the absolute exhaustion in her eyes won out. She slid a thick binder across the desk. For 3 hours, we worked side by side. I pulled the codes, verified the timestamps, and organized the files. She reviewed the clinical notes and signed. By midnight, she had stopped checking whether I was still there. She simply slid the next binder into the space between us. "Your filing system is hostile," I said. "It survived 3 department chairs." "That isn't a defense." The corner of her mouth lifted before she bent over the next chart. I didn't need her to entertain me. She didn't need to be the infallible chief of surgery. At 2 a.m., she signed the last file and dropped the pen. She let out a long, shaky breath, leaning back in her chair. "I haven't slept more than 4 hours a night since the first denial notice arrived," she said quietly. "I know." I stacked the files precisely, aligning the edges. She looked at my hands. "You never panic, do you?" "Panic is inefficient." I stood, taking the empty coffee mug from her desk. The clinic-side logs confirm manual overrides. Every event traces back to a registered terminal in the hospital's executive suite, Vance's office. Her shoulders slumped. Proving it was from his office isn't enough. He'll say his terminal was spoofed. We need the actual digital signatures to prove he authorized the denials, and those are locked in the hospital's internal physical server room. We need a lawful preservation order and a supervised forensic capture, I said. No shortcuts. Kace, even with authorization, Vance will try to turn the audit into misconduct. If the chain breaks, he'll ruin you and bury the clinic with you. Then we don't let the chain break. She stood up, closing the distance between us. She was close enough that I could see the faint dark circles under her eyes, the exhaustion she hid from the world. I mean it, she said, her voice fierce. I've spent my entire life fighting for my place here. I will not be the reason you lose yours. I looked down at her. I meant to step back, to maintain the professional distance. Instead, I let my hand rise. I didn't touch her face. I just placed my palm flat against the solid wood of the doorframe beside her head, steadying myself, keeping the boundary intact. I can perform the capture while you keep Vance in the atrium, I said, keeping my voice low. Only for her. But I move only after you file the preservation notice and authorize the risk. Do you want me to handle it? She searched my face, then nodded. Yes. State compliance will supervise. I'll file before you enter the building. The hospital's annual fundraising gala was held in the main atrium. It was a glass and steel cathedral of medicine, currently filled with the same donors and executives from the garden party. I wasn't on the security detail tonight. I was in a borrowed tailored suit, moving through the crowd as a registered independent consultant. My earpiece was out. In my inside pocket were a hardware write blocker, 2 sterile evidence drives, and the chain of custody forms Darcy had filed that morning. I saw Darcy across the room. She was in a dark green dress this time, standing in a circle of board members. Vance was next to her, looking smug. She caught my eye for a fraction of a second, then excused herself long enough to meet me beside a marble column. She handed me a paper cup of black coffee. You've been staring at the same cup in my office for 2 weeks. I assumed this was safer than guessing. I took it. It is. Her fingers straightened the borrowed tie at my collar. You look uncomfortable. The tie keeps trying to become a noose. A quick smile touched her mouth and disappeared. She pressed a folded packet to my chest. Emergency preservation order, my authorization, General Counsel's countersignature, privacy approval, and State Case 44-A9. Elena supervises. Hospital IT authenticates every connection. I authorize the capture. Last chance to change the plan. Darcy closed my hand around the paper. No shortcuts, no missing signatures. Bring me proof that can survive him. She pressed the coffee back into my hand. And bring yourself back too. I nodded and slipped out of the atrium. The administrative corridors were silent and sterile. Elena Park from State Oversight waited outside the 4th-floor server room. She checked Darcy's authorization, General Counsel's countersignature, privacy approval, my license, and both drive serials. A hospital IT custodian authenticated the executive terminal, matched its asset ID to the order, and unlocked the steel door. Inside, the custodian mounted the audit log volume through a read-only forensic bridge. Elena opened the evidence log. I connected the hardware write blocker, inserted the first sterile drive, and recorded the terminal ID, time, case number, and serial. The override table showed Richard Vance's credential-bound audit signature beside all 50 denied claims. At 85%, the door behind us hissed open. Step away from the terminal. Vance stood there, flanked by the same 2 private security contractors from the garden party. He held his executive keycard like a badge of office. You're the rent-a-cop from the party, he said, his voice echoing in the cold room. Whatever paper Darcy handed you, I'm revoking access now. Disconnect that drive. Elena raised the open evidence log. The preservation order has already been accepted by the State Oversight Office. Interfering with the capture will be recorded. Vance ignored her. The progress bar reached 95%. Grab him, he ordered. The 2 contractors moved forward. 100%. ASHA 256 hash appeared. Elena read it aloud while I copied it onto the custody form. I made a verified second copy. She logged both serials, sealed both drives separately, retained custody, and handed me the signed hash receipt. The silver device in my pocket was only the right blocker's calibration drive. It held no hospital data. I turned with my hands visible. I didn't fight when the contractors caught my arms and pulled them behind my back. Elena told them twice that they were interfering with a state-supervised preservation, but Vance ordered them to empty my pockets. They found my keys, my wallet, and the calibration drive. Vance held it up, smiling, stupid, call the police. Hold on. Darcy stood in the doorway, breathing a little faster from taking the stairs in heels. She looked at the contractors holding me, then crossed the room without raising her voice. She placed the signed preservation order flat on the server console and read the case number once. "Release him, Richard." "Your friend was stealing patient data," Vance said, mockingly gentle. "The committee will expedite your suspension." "He is a licensed consultant performing a state-supervised preservation," Darcy said. "The order has my authorization, General Counsel's countersignature, privacy approval, state acceptance, and hospital IT authentication. Case 4-4-A9. Vance's face darkened. "You cannot protect him with a procedural trick." Darcy did not raise her voice. She tapped the authorization once. "This is not a trick. It is a record. If you order another person to interfere with it, the state investigator standing beside you will add that decision to the same case." Elena showed him the evidence log. "Mr. Myers preserved the source correctly. Both verified copies are sealed in my custody, and your contractors are in my incident notes." Vance looked at the two men. Their hands loosened before he gave another command. "Let him go," he snapped. The contractors released me. I adjusted my jacket, where both sealed copies remained in Elena's custody. I walked over to Darcy. "We're done here," I said to Vance. I put a hand at the small of her back, just a light, practical pressure, and guided her out of the freezing room. We walked down the hallway, into the elevator, and down to the parking garage in total silence. When we reached my truck, Darcy missed the door handle on her first try. Her palm struck the metal with a flat sound, and she pressed both hands over her face. Darcy leaned against the passenger door, putting her face in her hands. She was shaking. I thought I was too late. I saw him check his phone and leave the atrium. "I thought they were going to arrest you." "I had it under control," I said quietly. She dropped her hands, looking up at me, furious. "You let them grab you. You let him corner you in there. Why didn't you just leave when the alarm tripped?" "Because the download wasn't finished." I held up Elena's signed hash receipt. "The master's in state custody. We have the executive credential audit entries. He can't erase them now." Her next accusation never came. Her fingers closed around the receipt, and her shoulders sagged against the passenger door. When her hand brushed mine, her skin was cold from the garage air. "You risked your freedom," she whispered, "for a clinic that isn't yours." "It's yours," I said simply. I opened the truck door for her. When the wiper dragged across the windshield, it skipped the same strip of glass. Darcy stared at it. "You can preserve hospital evidence, but this defeats you?" "It has seniority." A breath of laughter escaped her before she covered it with one hand. Elena followed us to the clinic with the sealed working copy in her custody. Squeak, skip, squeak, skip. In Darcy's office, she broke the seal, logged the time, and watched us open the copy offline. Its hash matched her signed receipt. The logs were damning. Richard Vance had logged in manually, night after night, overriding the automated approvals and stamping the denials with his own executive credential. Darcy sat in her chair, staring at the screen. "Elena will send the sealed master to the state review team tonight, on Monday. The insurer's special investigations unit can place the denials under expedited review and restore temporary coverage while the formal forensic report is completed." "And Vance?" I asked. "The oversight notice requires the board to suspend his access pending investigation. If the report confirms what we're seeing, removal follows." "And the visa?" The board council already agreed that no disciplinary action can proceed while the clinic's insolvency finding is under fraud review. She let out a careful breath. It isn't finished, but he can't use the claims to take my sponsorship away now. She looked up at me. The glow of the screen caught the gold flecks in her brown eyes. There was no crisis left to solve, no deadline ticking down, just the quiet hum of the clinic around us. "What happens now, Kace?" she asked. It was the question I had been avoiding. The job was done. The perimeter was secure. The threat was neutralized. I was supposed to pack up my laptop and go back to my night shifts in my empty apartment. I stood by the door, my hands in my pockets. I respected her independence too much to assume I had a permanent place here. "Now," I said, keeping my voice level, "you go back to being the chief of surgery. You sleep a full 8 hours. You don't have to look over your shoulder anymore." She frowned, a small, genuine expression of hurt crossing her face. "And you?" "I have a site assessment in the financial district on Tuesday," I said. I was swallowing the emotion, forcing myself to be practical. She had her whole life here. I was just the guy who fixed the broken door. I nodded to her, locked the deadbolt behind me. I left the clinic. I didn't look back. The next 3 weeks were a long, gray stretch of routine. I worked. I slept. I checked in on Leo's arm, which was healing clean. He filed a retaliation complaint through the workers' rights clinic Darcy had given him, and the contractor moved him to a safer crew while the foreman was investigated. We still had 8 months of silence between us, but now he called before showing up. The formal forensic report confirmed the manual overrides. The insurer restored the 50 claims. The state board suspended Vance during its inquiry, and the hospital directors removed him from the finance committee. He resigned 2 days later, this time with the investigation named in the public notice. The Martinez Free Clinic also received a grant from the Underwriters Community Health Fund. It was a Friday night. I was off shift, sitting in my apartment, staring at a schematic for a new client. The silence, which I usually craved, felt suffocating. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Mason is hosting a fundraiser for the clinic tonight at the Maritime Museum. I'm standing in a room full of people in suits. I need an exit." I stared at the screen. I didn't reply. I just grabbed my jacket. The Maritime Museum was a massive, echoing hall filled with restored ships and donors holding champagne flutes. Mason had turned the clinic's restored funding into the second charity party he had hosted that season. He spotted me at the main doors, took in my gray t-shirt and dark jacket, and only pointed toward the wooden hull where Darcy stood. I saw her immediately. She was standing near a massive wooden hull, wearing a black dress this time, surrounded by people trying to shake her hand, trying to get a piece of her success. She looked flawless, untouchable, the boss of the room. But as I walked closer, I saw the tight set of her jaw, the exhaustion hiding just beneath the polish. She saw me. The crowd around her seemed to blur. She didn't hesitate. She excused herself, stepping away from the donors, and walked straight toward me. She stopped a foot away. We didn't touch. "You came," she said. "You called," I replied. The string quartet was playing something classical, soaring up to the vaulted ceiling. The noise of Mason's party washed around us. Darcy glanced toward the donors, then stepped close enough that the crowd could no longer hear her. "Let's get out of here," she whispered. "Just you and me." I didn't ask where we were going. I just nodded. I put a hand at the small of her back, and we walked out of the museum, leaving the crowd and the noise behind. We walked to my truck. The fog was rolling in off the water, cold and damp. I opened the passenger door for her. She climbed in. I got in the driver's side, turned the key, and switched on the wipers. Squeak skip, squeak skip. It was the sound of something broken, continuing to move forward anyway. "My place?" I asked, putting the truck in gear. She reached across the console, her hand settling over mine on the gear shift. It wasn't a desperate grab. It was a firm, steady claim. "Your place," Darcy said. 2 years later, the report cleared the insolvency finding. 6 weeks later, Darcy's visa renewal was approved under a long-term hospital employment agreement. The clinic was thriving. I had upgraded the security system myself, installing biometric locks that actually worked, though I made sure the back door still opened with a physical key. Leo had opened a small framing company with written safety rules and a crew that could report injuries without losing a paycheck. The first thing he fixed after signing his lease was the damaged wiper arm on my truck. Rain moved across the clinic windows at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. The clinic was closed, and my truck sat outside with both wipers resting evenly at the base of the glass. I was at the metal desk in Darcy's back office, reviewing a contract for a new client. The deadbolt turned. Darcy walked in. She was wearing her scrubs, a stethoscope draped around her neck, looking exhausted and perfectly at home. She dropped a small paper bag on the desk. "Tacos," she said, collapsing into the chair across from me. "From the truck on 4th. Extra lime." "Thank you," I said, saving my document and closing the laptop. I opened the bag. I handed her the taco with no onions, exactly the way she liked it. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She took a bite, closing her eyes in bliss. The board meeting ran late. They want me to chair the ethics committee next year. "Are you going to?" I asked. I told them I had to consult my schedule. She opened her eyes, looking at me. "We have that cabin rented in the mountains next year. I'm not missing it for a committee." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, heavy silver key. She slid it across the metal desk. It stopped against my laptop. It was the master key to her new house in the hills. "The contractor finished the locks today," she said quietly. "I told him there was only one person I trusted to check the perimeter." I looked at the key. Then I looked at her. She wasn't asking me to protect her. She was asking me to stay. I picked up the key, the metal cold and solid in my palm. I slid it onto my key ring, right next to the key for my truck. Looking back now, I understood the truth of it. The strongest position was still the one you never had to raise your voice to defend. You built it by showing up, quietly and consistently, until the foundation was too strong to shake. I leaned across the desk, handing her the extra lime. Outside, the repaired wipers swept the rain from the windshield in one clean, quiet pass. The end. Closing thoughts. Integrity is built through quiet choices that protect the people we value, especially when doing the right thing has a cost. Healthy love does not demand surrender or turn rescue into control. It creates enough safety for both people to remain capable, honest, and free. Would you have trusted Kace's plan or insisted on another way? Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.